Karen stole my electricity, my lawyer won a $12,000 judgment for theft today. The gavel hadn't even dropped yet and Deborah Whitfield was already screaming that the courtroom had no jurisdiction over her HOA. 6 months earlier, I didn't even know her name. I just knew the woman 2 doors down who smiled like a shark. My name is Marcus Reyes and I bought my first home on Willow Creek Lane thinking I'd finally found peace. I was wrong. Peace, in that neighborhood, came with a 30-page rulebook and a woman who enforced it like scripture. Deborah Whitfield ran the HOA board like her personal kingdom and everyone on Willow Creek learned to fear her clipboard. At first, it was small stuff. A fine for leaving my trash bin out an hour too long on Tuesday. Then it was my lawn. Grass exceeds 4 inches, the notice read, stapled to my door like a declaration of war. I mowed that lawn every single week. But Deborah didn't care about facts, she cared about control. My neighbor Priya warned me early. She picked me last year. Cost me $2,000 in fake violations, she whispered. I didn't believe her fully. Not yet. I thought maybe Priya had done something to deserve it. Then Deborah started walking past my house slower each morning, phone raised, snapping photos of anything she could twist. My mailbox was the wrong shade of black. My porch light was too bright for community harmony. Absurd, but official. Every fine came with a smug little note, per HOA Bylaw 4.2, She loved quoting rules nobody else had read. I started keeping every letter in a folder. Just in case. A quiet habit that would later save me completely. My wife Elena said I was being paranoid. It's just an old lady with too much time, she laughed. But old ladies with too much time and unchecked power, I was about to learn, can be dangerous. Deborah wasn't just petty. She was the board president, treasurer and secretary all at once, no oversight, no limits. She'd held the position for 11 years. Nobody else wanted the headache of fighting her for it. I started attending HOA meetings, just to understand the rules better. She hated that immediately. New residents shouldn't lecture long-time members, she said, cutting me off mid-sentence in front of 30 neighbors. I sat down, humiliated, but something in me shifted that night. I wasn't going to just take this quietly. The real trouble began the week I installed solar panels, fully permitted, fully legal, approved by the county. Deborah showed up unannounced, clipboard in hand, declaring my panels violated aesthetic uniformity standards nobody had ever enforced before. I showed her my county permit. She smiled thinly and said permits meant nothing inside her community. That word, her, stuck with me. This wasn't about rules. This was about ownership. About power. The fines started stacking. $500 a week for unauthorized modifications. It was outrageous and clearly personal. I asked to see the bylaw she cited. She promised to email it. She never did. Convenient. Meanwhile, my electric bill dropped to nearly nothing thanks to the panels, until suddenly, it didn't. My bill spiked back up, as if the solar system had stopped working entirely, overnight, for no reason. I climbed onto my roof to check the panels myself. They looked fine. Clean, connected, functioning perfectly. That's when I noticed something strange, a thick orange extension cord running from my breaker box, into Deborah's yard. I stood frozen on my ladder, staring at a cord I definitely hadn't installed, snaking straight to her garage. My hands were shaking as I traced it. It connected directly into an outlet outside her back door. I didn't confront her right away. I took photos instead. Time-stamped. Careful. My folder was growing thicker by the day. That night, I told Elena everything. She went pale. She's been stealing our power? For how long? I didn't know yet. But I intended to find out and I intended to prove every single watt. The next morning, I called an electrician friend, Chad, who agreed to inspect my panel quietly, off the books. Chad traced the wiring and confirmed it, someone had tapped directly into my solar output, bypassing the main meter. This isn't accidental, Chad said, snapping photos of his own. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing rigged this. I asked how long it might have been running. Chad pointed at corrosion on the splice. Months, easily. Months. That explained the malfunctioning panels. Deborah had been quietly mocking me about at every meeting since spring. I started documenting everything with real intention now, dates, photos, electrician notes, HOA letters, all organized by week. Priya, my neighbor, offered to help. Turns out she'd been secretly logging Deborah's abuses for over a year already. I have voicemails, Priya said. Threats. Recordings of her admitting she adjusts fines depending on who annoys her. We combined our evidence that night at my kitchen table, two victims realizing we weren't alone in this. Deborah, meanwhile, had no idea her quiet reign of terror was about to be dragged into daylight. The following week, she raised my fines again, now $3,200 total, threatening a lien on my house. A lien. Over grass height and a mailbox color. I almost laughed, if it weren't so infuriating. I requested a formal hearing before the board, citing HOA bylaws on due process. She denied the request outright. The board's decision is final, her email read. Further appeals will be considered harassment of leadership. Harassment. The audacity of that word, coming from the woman literally stealing electricity from my roof. That's when I decided, no more quiet folders. It was time to bring in a lawyer. I found Sandra Okafor, a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes and had a reputation for winning. Sandra reviewed my folder for 20 minutes, then looked up and said, "This isn't a dispute. This is a pattern." She flagged three things immediately: the illegal fines, the denied due process and, most seriously, the electricity theft. Theft of utilities is a criminal matter, not just civil, Sandra explained. This could go far beyond the HOA. I felt something unlock in my chest. For months I'd felt powerless. Now, finally, I had direction. Sandra drafted a formal cease and desist letter, demanding Deborah remove the wiring and reverse every fraudulent fine immediately. We sent it certified mail, with copies to the county utility board and the HOA's own management company. 2 days later, Deborah left a furious voicemail. "You think a lawyer scares me? I built this community." Her voice cracked with rage I hadn't heard before. Something in her control was already starting to slip. The management company, it turned out, had been getting complaints about Deborah for years, quietly filed, quietly ignored. Sandra requested those records under public disclosure rules. The company stalled, clearly nervous about what they contained. Meanwhile, Priya convinced two more neighbors, the Hendersons, to come forward with their own stories of unfair fines. A pattern was forming, not just my case, but a slow, decade-long abuse of power finally surfacing. Deborah responded by calling an emergency board meeting, declaring me a disruptive resident who needed to be silenced. I attended anyway. She tried to block me at the door. I recorded every second of it on my phone. "You have no right to be here," she snapped. I calmly replied, "I'm a homeowner. This meeting is public." The room went quiet. For the first time, I saw hesitation flicker across her face. One board member, an older man named Walter, finally spoke up. "Deborah, maybe we should hear him out." She shot him a look so venomous he immediately sat back down and said nothing more that night. I presented my electrician's report. Gasps rippled through the room when Chad's photos of the illegal wiring appeared on screen. Deborah insisted it was a simple misunderstanding, claiming a contractor must have mistakenly connected the wrong line. But Priya stood up next, holding her phone. "Play the voicemail," she said. The room fell dead silent. Deborah's own recorded voice filled the room. "That Reyes house has good sun exposure. Might as well use it." Her face turned white. She hadn't just stolen power, she'd bragged about it, on tape, months earlier. "That's taken out of context," she shouted, but nobody in that room believed her anymore. Not one person. Walter, visibly shaken, whispered, "Deborah, how long has this been going on?" She refused to answer him. The meeting ended in chaos, Deborah storming out, slamming the door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall. The picture frame was actually a hidden HOA financial ledger and it landed open, right at my feet. I glanced down instinctively. Numbers didn't add up. Landscaping fees paid twice. Vendor names I didn't recognize. Sandra later confirmed, some of those vendors traced back to Deborah's own son's shell company. My stomach dropped. She wasn't just abusing power for control. She'd been quietly siphoning HOA funds through fake invoices for years. This was no longer about my electric bill. This was fraud, on a scale nobody had imagined. I brought the ledger photos straight to Sandra. She went very quiet, then said, "This changes everything, Marcus." She recommended we loop in the district attorney's economic crimes unit, alongside our civil case against Deborah. Meanwhile, Deborah tried a new tactic, sympathy. She posted on the neighborhood app about harassment from certain residents. Comments flooded in, some sympathetic, most furious. People remembered their own fines, their own humiliations at her hands. "She fined me $400 for a garden gnome," one comment read. "She said my daughter's chalk art was vandalism," said another. The floodgates opened. Years of quiet resentment poured out publicly and Deborah couldn't control the narrative anymore. She deleted the post within an hour, but Priya had already screenshotted every single comment for our file. One commenter, a woman named Julie, revealed she used to work as Deborah's HOA bookkeeper, until she quit suddenly. Sandra reached out to Julie directly. After a nervous silence, Julie agreed to talk, off the record at first. "I didn't quit," Julie admitted. "She fired me the week I asked about the landscaping invoices. I was scared." Julie had copies. Real bank statements, real emails, proof Deborah's son's company had never actually done any landscaping work. It was fabricated from the start, an empty shell used purely to funnel HOA dues into Deborah's own pocket. Sandra filed everything with the DA's office that same week, alongside our civil suit for fraud and utility theft. Deborah, unaware how deep the hole now was, doubled down, threatening to sue me for defamation instead. Her lawyer sent a cease and desist of his own, demanding I stop spreading false claims about her leadership. Sandra laughed reading it. "She's threatening us with the exact thing she's guilty of. Let her try." We entered a strange lull. Both sides quiet, both sides preparing. I could feel the storm gathering. During that lull, Elena found something unexpected, an old newspaper clipping about Deborah, buried in a community archive. 15 years ago, in a different state, Deborah had been removed from another HOA board for embezzlement. She'd changed her name slightly, moved states and rebuilt her reign of control somewhere nobody would recognize her. This wasn't her first kingdom. It was her second. And she'd learned to hide the evidence better this time. Sandra confirmed the record. Same social security number, different spelling of her maiden name. It was undeniably her. "She's a repeat offender," Sandra said. "Judges take that very seriously. This just became a much stronger case." Meanwhile, Deborah sensed the walls closing in and tried something desperate, offering me a private settlement. Her lawyer proposed dropping all my fines and paying $5,000 quietly, if I agreed to withdraw everything. I almost considered it, exhausted from months of stress. But Sandra reminded me this was bigger than my fines now. "If you settle quietly, she keeps doing this to the next family," Sandra said. That truth hit hard. I thought of Priya's voicemails, of the Hendersons' fines, of Julie's fear, of whoever came after us. I declined the settlement. Deborah's lawyer seemed genuinely surprised. Nobody had ever said no to her before. The HOA management company, sensing legal liability, finally suspended Deborah's board authority, pending investigation, a first in 11 years. She wasn't removed yet, but her clipboard, for once, had lost its terrifying power over the neighborhood. Walter, the quiet board member, secretly reached out to Sandra, offering to testify against Deborah himself. "I've stayed quiet for years out of fear," Walter admitted. "I can't do that anymore. Not after the ledger." Walter revealed Deborah had threatened him personally, fines on his elderly mother's house if he ever spoke up. That threat, recorded in an old email he'd saved, became one of the strongest pieces of evidence yet. As the DA's investigation deepened, Deborah's public mask cracked completely. She stopped attending community events entirely. Neighbors who once feared her now openly gossiped on porches, trading stories of fines she'd invented from nothing. I felt something unexpected, not just anger anymore, but a strange, growing sense of collective vindication. Sandra scheduled our civil case for the county courthouse, requesting damages for illegal fines, utility theft and emotional distress. The criminal fraud case, running parallel, moved faster than expected once Julie's bank records were formally verified. Deborah's own lawyer, sensing the mounting evidence, quietly withdrew from representing her just weeks before the hearing. She scrambled for new counsel, finding only a young, inexperienced attorney willing to take her toxic case. That new attorney turned out to be Julie's cousin, completely unaware of the family connection until mid-preparation. When he realized, he immediately recused himself, citing conflict of interest. Deborah was furious and utterly alone. She showed up to a preliminary hearing representing herself, confident her decade of expertise in bylaws would save her. The judge was not impressed by her rambling citations of made-up HOA authority that held zero legal weight. "Ma'am, this is a court of law, not your community clubhouse," the judge said flatly, silencing her instantly. I watched her face in that moment and saw, for the first time, real fear instead of arrogance. The pretrial hearing revealed the DA had additional charges ready: embezzlement, wire fraud and falsifying official HOA records. Deborah's bail conditions included surrendering her passport, a stunning fall for the woman who once ruled Willow Creek. News of her arrest spread through the neighborhood app within hours, screenshots and reactions flooding every thread. "I always knew something was off," one neighbor posted, conveniently forgetting how loudly they'd once defended her. "Priya sent me a single text, 'We did this.' I stared at it for a long time, feeling it fully. Elena hugged me that night and said, 'You never gave up, even when everyone said you were overreacting.' I thought about Priya's early warning, about Chad's electrician report, about Julie's fear finally turning into courage. Every piece of evidence, gathered quietly over months, was about to converge in one single courtroom moment. The civil trial date arrived first. Sandra prepared me for hours, walking through every question the defense might ask. Deborah, out on bail, arrived at the civil hearing wearing pearls, as if respectability could rewrite the record. Her new lawyer, hired days earlier, looked visibly unprepared, flipping through papers he barely understood. Sandra opened calmly, laying out the timeline: illegal fines, denied due process and documented utility theft with photographic proof. Chad testified first, describing the wiring in clear technical detail that left no room for interpretation or doubt. "This wasn't an accident," Chad told the judge. "Someone deliberately spliced a residential solar line for personal use." Deborah's lawyer tried to argue it was a contractor's error, but had no contractor, no invoice, no proof at all. Then Priya took the stand, playing the voicemail again, this time in a courtroom instead of a meeting hall. The judge's expression shifted visibly as Deborah's own recorded voice admitted, casually, to stealing my solar power. "Might as well use it," her past self said aloud, echoing through the courtroom like a confession from a ghost. The judge revealed she recognized Deborah's name from the earlier out-of-state embezzlement case, having reviewed prior filings. "This isn't your first pattern of behavior, is it, Ms. Whitfield?" the judge asked, and Deborah went completely silent. Her silence, in a courtroom, spoke louder than any denial ever could have in that moment. Walter testified next, describing years of quiet fear, of threats against his elderly mother, of fabricated fines everywhere. "She ran that board like her personal fiefdom," Walter said. "None of us dared question her, until now." Julie's testimony followed, laying out the shell company, the fake invoices and years of siphoned HOA maintenance funds. Bank statements were entered as evidence, showing thousands of dollars flowing into an account tied to Deborah's own son. Deborah's face, once so composed, now twisted with barely controlled fury as her secrets unraveled in public. "This is a smear campaign," she suddenly shouted, standing up despite her lawyer's frantic attempts to calm her. "Order," the judge snapped, banging the gavel once, sharp and final, silencing Deborah's outburst immediately. I watched Elena grip my hand tightly beside me, both of us holding our breath through the tension. Sandra rose for closing arguments, calmly summarizing 11 years of unchecked power finally meeting real consequences. "This isn't about a lawn or a mailbox," Sandra said. "It's about a woman who mistook a title for a throne." The judge took a short recess to review the evidence, leaving the courtroom in tense, electric silence. During the recess, Deborah's lawyer quietly leaned over and whispered that he was withdrawing effective immediately. Deborah sat utterly alone at her table now, no counsel, no allies, no more clipboard to hide behind. When the judge returned, the room fell completely still, everyone leaning forward for the verdict about to come. "I find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts," the judge announced, her voice steady and unwavering. $12,000, covering stolen electricity, fraudulent fines, legal fees and emotional distress caused by months of harassment. The judge also formally referred her prior fines against Priya and the Hendersons to a separate review process. Deborah sat frozen, staring straight ahead, as if refusing to believe the verdict applied to her at all. Then, almost robotically, she stood and shouted, "You'll all regret this. I built this community from nothing." Bailiff stepped forward as she grew louder, her composure completely gone, replaced by raw, exposed desperation. "This HOA is mine," she screamed, gripping the table as they gently but firmly guided her toward the exit. Every fine, every threat, every quiet act of cruelty seemed to collapse into that single humiliating moment. I didn't feel joy exactly. I felt something quieter, relief and a strange, heavy kind of closure. Outside the courthouse, Priya hugged me tightly. $12,000, she whispered. "And it's finally over." Elena squeezed my hand and smiled through tears. "It's not just about the money. It's about being believed." Sandra shook my hand firmly. "The criminal case is next," she reminded me. "This was only the civil half." I nodded, exhausted but resolute. There was still more accountability waiting and I intended to see it through. Word spread through Willow Creek by evening, neighbors gathering in driveways, trading updates like breaking news. The management company issued a statement within hours, formally removing Deborah from the HOA board, effective immediately. Walter was appointed interim board president, promising an independent audit of every HOA financial record from the last decade. "We're starting over," he announced at an emergency meeting. Real transparency this time. Real accountability. The audit revealed Deborah hadn't acted alone, a second board member had quietly signed off on fake invoices too. That member resigned within days, terrified of facing charges alongside Deborah once the fraud fully surfaced. The criminal case moved forward quickly, the DA citing overwhelming documentation as grounds for expedited proceedings. Deborah, released on modified bail, was ordered to surrender any remaining HOA records still in her possession. She resisted at first, claiming personal ownership over her files, until a court order forced compliance within 48 hours. Those files revealed even more, years of falsified meeting minutes covering up her true financial maneuvers. I sat in on the criminal pretrial hearing, watching the same woman who once terrorized my mailbox now visibly small. Her new public defender argued for leniency, citing her age and lack of prior, until the prosecutor corrected the record. "She has a prior history in another state," the prosecutor said. "This is not her first pattern of fraud." The judge's eyebrows rose. Leniency arguments crumbled the moment her repeat behavior became part of official record. It turned out Deborah's own son, tied to the shell company, had also filed a complaint against her. He testified he hadn't known his mother used his name for fake invoices until federal agents contacted him directly. "She used my identity without asking," he said quietly. I found out I owed taxes on money I never received. That betrayal, even from her own family, painted a portrait far darker than the neighborhood had ever imagined. Deborah's face crumbled hearing her son's testimony, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in months. I almost felt a flicker of pity, watching a woman lose not just power, but every relationship she'd weaponized. Almost. Then I remembered the fines, the lies, the stolen electricity, and the pity faded quickly away. The criminal trial concluded faster than expected, given the sheer volume of documented, undeniable financial evidence. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with their verdict on all counts. Guilty, the foreperson announced, on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft against a family member. Deborah's knees visibly buckled. She gripped the defense table, the word guilty echoing through her disbelief. 3 years in prison, 5 years probation, and full restitution to the HOA and residents. The restitution order included repaying every resident she'd wrongfully fined, plus the $12,000 civil judgment against her. The court also permanently barred her from ever serving on any HOA board again, in any state. That final clause felt like poetic justice, the clipboard, finally, forcibly, ripped from her hands forever. Willow Creek held its first truly open community meeting weeks later, without fear hanging over every raised hand. Walter proposed new bylaws limiting board terms, requiring independent audits and mandating due process for every resident dispute. The vote passed unanimously, residents finally reclaiming a community that had quietly belonged to one woman for too long. Priya was elected to the new board, promising transparency after years of documenting Deborah's abuses in silence. Julie, once terrified of retaliation, was publicly thanked at the meeting, her courage finally recognized by everyone present. Chad joked he should start an HOA forensic electrician side business, given how his testimony had changed everything. Elena laughed for the first time in months, the tension of the past year finally, visibly lifting from her shoulders. I stood at that meeting and realized my quiet folder of evidence had ended 11 years of unchecked tyranny. It hadn't been about revenge, not really. It had been about refusing to accept small injustices as normal. Deborah's house, empty now, sat with a foreclosure sign in the yard within a few months of sentencing. Nobody in the neighborhood felt sorry for her. Too many of them remembered their own humiliating fines too well. The solar panels on my roof finally worked exactly as designed, no strange cords, no stolen watts, no lies. Months later, I received a letter from another HOA in a neighboring county, asking about Deborah's history. Apparently, she'd tried applying for a management position there under yet another slightly altered name. I forwarded every court document I had. That door, at least, closed firmly and permanently behind her. The $12,000 judgment finally arrived, garnished from whatever assets remained after her restitution obligations were settled first. It wasn't a fortune, but it felt like justice made tangible, made real, made undeniably mine. I used part of it to fund a small legal fund for the HOA, helping future residents fight unfair fines. Priya named it, half-joking, the Reyes Fund for people who refuse to mow in fear. We all laughed at the meeting, a strange lightness returning to a place that had felt so heavy for so long. Elena and I planted new flowers along our front walk, the first time in a year we'd done so without dread. No fines came. No angry notes. Just quiet, ordinary neighborhood life, finally allowed to exist again. I still keep my old folder, evidence and all, tucked in a drawer as a strange kind of trophy. Not out of anger anymore, but as a reminder of how far patience, proof and persistence can actually go. Walter told me once that fear only works when people believe they're alone in facing it. Deborah counted on isolation, on shame, on neighbors too scared to compare notes with one another. The moment we stopped being alone, Priya, Julie, Walter, Chad, Elena, myself, her entire kingdom collapsed. Willow Creek isn't perfect now, but it's fair, transparent and free of a woman who mistook control for justice. Sometimes I still see her name searched online, followed by fraud, embezzlement, HOA scandal, the legacy she truly built. I think about that courtroom moment often, her voice on tape, casual and cruel, admitting exactly what she'd done. Justice, it turns out, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits quietly, in a folder, for its moment.